Yeah. But did you read the lawsuit? Hi, everybody. My name is Jem, and today we are going to take a look at the lawsuit between Blake Lively and her co-star/director, Justin Baldoni. Let's get into it. Okay, everybody, we are going to start by reading this lawsuit, and I am only going to highlight the sexual harassment aspect of this lawsuit. Factual background. Justin Baldoni and James Heath of Wayfair engaged in inappropriate and unwelcome behavior toward Miss Lively and others on the set of It Ends With Us. Mr. Baldoni launched Wayfair Studios along with Mr. Surowitz in 2020. Mr. Heath serves as Wayfair's Chief Executive Officer. Mr. Surowitz is a leading financier of Wayfair, and he, Mr. Heath, and Mr. Baldoni are all close personal friends. Under the Wayfair banner, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath have many platforms, including the Man Enough podcast, which they co-host. Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath have positioned Wayfair as a male feminist platform that explores gender roles, dismantles toxic masculinity, and creates a safer and judgment-free society for women. Mr. Baldoni serves not only as the co-founder and co-chairman of the studio that financed and ran the production on It Ends With Us, he also served as director, executive producer, and co-lead actor playing the role of Ryle Kinzid. As studio head and director, all actors, crew, and staff on the film, including Ms. Lively, answered to Ms. Baldoni. In his words, he was, quote-unquote, the leader who sat, quote-unquote, at the top of his totem pole. While Sony was the distributor releasing the film, Wayfair was responsible for the production, and Wayfair was led by Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath. Production of the film began in early May 2023 and lasted until it was suspended in mid-June 2023 due to the Writers Guild of America's strike. During that time, Miss Lively and other cast and crew experienced invasive, unwelcome, unprofessional, and sexually inappropriate behavior by Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath. Because Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath held all leadership positions on the production, they answered to no one and brushed off or ignored concerns Miss Lively and others expressed. Mr. Baldoni ignored well-established industry protocols in filming intimate scenes and exploited the lack of controls on set to behave inappropriately. Wayfair failed to adhere to guide rules as well as Ms. Lively's contract and standard industry safety protocols with respect to nudity and intimate scenes, which the Screen Actors Guild and the American Federation of Television and Radio Arts, SAG-AFTRA, acknowledges place performers in uniquely vulnerable situations. Such safeguards ignored by Wayfair include providing performers with appropriate notice of nudity and simulated sex and ensuring that 1. Consent is given free of pressure or coercion. 2. Signed nudity riders are in place spelling out the parameters of nudity or simulated scenes. 3. Safe and secure working conditions that are not detrimental to a performer's health, safety, morals, and career. And 4, the use of intimacy coordinators to observe intimate scenes. Without these protections in place, Mr. Baldoni improvised physical intimacy that had not been rehearsed, choreographed, or discussed with Miss Lively with no intimacy coordinator involved. For instance, Mr. Baldoni discreetly bit and sucked on Miss Lively's lower lip during a scene in which he improvised numerous kisses on each take. Mr. Baldoni insisted on shooting the full scene over and over again, well beyond what would have been required on an ordinary set, and without advance notice or consent. On another occasion, Mr. Baldoni and Miss Lively were filming a slow dance scene for a montage in which no sound was recorded. Mr. Baldoni chose to let the camera roll and have them perform the scene, but did not act in character as Ryle. Instead, he spoke to Miss Lively out of character as himself. At one point, he leaned forward and slowly dragged his lips from her ear and down her neck as he said, "It smells so good." None of this was remotely in character or based on any dialogue in the script, and nothing needed to be said because, again, there was no sound. Mr. Baldoni was caressing Miss Lively with his mouth in a way that had nothing to do with their roles. When Miss Lively later objected to this behavior, Mr. Baldoni's response was, "I'm not even attracted to you." Mr. Baldoni inserted improvised, gratuitous, sexual content and/or scenes involving nudity into the film, including for an underage character, in highly unsettling ways. After Miss Lively signed onto the movie based on a draft of the script, Mr. Baldoni, without Ms. Lively's knowledge or consent, personally added graphic content, including a scene in which Miss Lively was to orgasm on camera. When Miss Lively objected to these additions, Mr. Baldoni insisted he had added them because he was making the film, quote-unquote, through the female gaze. Although he agreed to remove the scenes, he made a last-ditch attempt to keep one in which the couple orgasmed together on their wedding night, which he said was important to him because he and his partner climaxed simultaneously during intercourse. Mr. Baldoni then intrusively asked Miss Lively whether she and her husband climaxed simultaneously during intercourse, which Miss Lively found invasive and refused to discuss. On the day of shooting the scene in which Miss Lively's character gives birth, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath suddenly pressured Miss Lively to simulate full nudity, despite no mention of nudity for this scene in the script, her contract, or in previous creative discussions. Mr. Baldoni insisted to Miss Lively that women give birth naked and that his wife had ripped off her clothes during labor. He claimed it was not normal for women to remain in their hospital gowns while giving birth. Miss Lively disagreed, but felt forced into a compromise that she would be naked from below the chest down. When the birth scene was filmed, the set was chaotic, crowded, and utterly lacking in standard industry protections for filming nude scenes, such as choreographing the scene with an intimacy coordinator, having a signed nudity rider, or simply turning off the monitors so the scene was not broadcast to all crew on set and on their personal phones and iPad. Mr. Heath and Mr. Baldoni also failed to close the set, allowing non-essential crew to pass through while Miss Lively was mostly nude with her legs spread wide in stirrups and only a small piece of fabric covering her genitalia. Among the non-essential persons present that day was Wayfair co-chairman Mr. Sorowitz, who flew in for one of his few set visits. Miss Lively was not provided with anything to cover herself with between takes until after she made multiple requests. Miss Lively became even more alarmed when Mr. Baldoni introduced his best friend to play the role of the OBGYN when ordinarily a small role of this nature would be filled by a local doctor. Miss Lively felt that the selection of Mr. Baldoni's friend for this intimate role in which the actor's face and hands were in close proximity to her nearly nude genitalia for a birth scene was invasive and humiliating. To add insult to injury, Mr. Heath approached Miss Lively and her assistant on set and started playing a video of a fully nude woman with her legs spread apart. Miss Lively thought he was showing her pornography and stopped him. Mr. Heath explained that the video was his wife giving birth. Miss Lively was alarmed and asked Mr. Heath if his wife knew he was sharing the video, to which he replied, "She isn't weird about this stuff," as if Miss Lively was weird for not welcoming it. Miss Lively and her assistant excused themselves, stunned that Mr. Heath had shown them a nude video. Mr. Baldoni added a detailed scene to the film in which the underage version of Miss Lively's character, Lily, loses her virginity. In both the book and the script for the film, there was no sex scene. Instead, the details about this moment were left to the audience's imagination. But Mr. Baldoni added in considerable details, including both dialogue between young Lily and her boyfriend, Atlas, about the loss of her virginity, as well as a simulated sex scene in which Mr. Baldoni filmed and included in his initial cut of the film. A close-up of young Lily's face accompanied by an audible gasp at the moment of preparation. Miss Lively was informed that when this scene was shot, after Mr. Baldoni called cut, he walked over to the actors and said, "I know I'm not supposed to say this, but that was hot. And did you two practice this before?" Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath discussed their personal sexual experiences and previous addiction and tried to pressure Miss Lively to reveal details about her intimate life. During a car ride with Miss Lively, her assistant and driver, Mr. Baldoni claimed to Miss Lively that he had been sexually abused by a former girlfriend, which he has since shared publicly. At the end of the story, Mr. Baldoni shared that it had caused him to re-examine his past. He then said, "Did I always ask for consent? No. Did I always listen when they said no? No." Mr. Baldoni claimed this was an example of how we all have things from which we can learn and grow. Ms. Lively was unsettled by Mr. Baldoni's suggestion that he had engaged in sexual conduct without consent. When Ms. Lively exited the car, her driver immediately remarked that he did not want Ms. Lively to be alone with Mr. Baldoni going forward. On the first day of production, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath described their past sexual relationships to Miss Lively, including that one of them used to hook up with a woman. Mr. Baldoni said that he decided the woman wasn't the one, so then Mr. Heath had gotten together with her. Miss Lively found this description of passing along a woman to be disrespectful and disturbing. Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath often spoke of their previous pornography addiction. Mr. Baldoni would often reference pornography to Miss Lively. Hoping to shut the subject down, she said to him privately that she had never seen it. Later, when Mr. Baldoni was once again referencing his experiences with pornography, he revealed in front of the other cast and crew that Miss Lively had never seen porn. It was an incredible invasion of her privacy to discuss any aspect of her intimate life with the cast and crew, much less reveal something that she had only told Mr. Baldoni to try to get him to stop talking about the subject with her. Mr. Baldoni engaged in other behaviors that were shocking and emotionally distressing. For example, he claimed he could speak to the dead, and on several occasions told her that he had spoken to her dead father. It was off-putting and volatile for Mr. Baldoni to claim a personal relationship with her recently deceased father. Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath were also constantly hugging and touching cast and crew. When Miss Lively or others avoided this touching, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath would retaliate by becoming irritated, cold, and uncollaborative. The result was an unwelcoming and mercurial environment for Miss Lively, her employees, and others on set. Mr. Baldoni objectified Miss Lively and other women by commenting on or criticizing their bodies as objects. Mr. Baldoni often referred to women in the workplace as sexy. When they expressed discomfort, Mr. Baldoni would deflect or try to pass it off, which undermined Miss Lively and others' concerns. For example, on one occasion that Miss Lively observed, he told a female cast member that her leather pants looked sexy when she arrived to the set. When she rebuffed his comment because she was uncomfortable, rather than apologizing, he brushed it off with, "I can say that because my wife is here today." Miss Lively felt embarrassed witnessing this kind of commentary, as did others. On another day, Miss Lively wore a low-cut dress to facilitate her breastfeeding, but had it covered up with a coat. When the jacket briefly popped open at one point to reveal the dress, Mr. Baldoni commented how much he liked her outfit, which flustered Miss Lively. Later that day, Mr. Baldoni pressured Miss Lively, who was in her pre-approved wardrobe, to remove her coat in front of the crew and multiple background actors in a packed bar. He said he wanted to see her onesies under the coat because it was zipped so low to reveal her lace bra. Consistent with past practice, he said, "I think you look sexy," in a tone that made her feel oogled and exposed. With other female cast present, she said, "That's not what I'm going for." He bristled and replied, "I'm sorry, hot." Deeply uncomfortable, Miss Lively said, "Not that either." Mr. Baldoni responded sarcastically, "I guess I missed the HR meeting," and walked away. Another woman on the production spoke to Miss Lively afterward to offer empathy and to share her own similar experiences with Mr. Baldoni, commenting about her in sexual terms. As a result of Mr. Baldoni's behavior, on May 29, 2023, another cast member lodged a sexual harassment complaint about Mr. Baldoni's gross and unwanted comments towards her and others. While on one hand, Mr. Baldoni was objectifying Miss Lively as a sex object, on the other hand, he went out of his way to message criticisms of her age and weight, neither of which she could change during filming. On the second day of filming, for example, Mr. Baldoni made the rest of the casting crew wait for hours while he cried in Miss Lively's dressing room, claiming social media commentators were saying that Miss Lively looked old and unattractive based on paparazzi photos from the set. She tried to reassure him that she should look authentic in the scenes depicted in the photos, which were just after her character had been abused by her fictional husband, rather than hot. Mr. Baldoni, however, appeared focused on Miss Lively's sexual appeal above all else. His lengthy outburst caused a delay in shooting, forcing an emotional scene to be shot haphazardly. To make matters worse, Miss Lively tried to have a meeting with Mr. Heath and the other producers to discuss Mr. Baldoni's unprofessional behavior described above. That meeting turned into yet another violation. Rather than an ordinary meeting time and place, Mr. Heath arrived unannounced at Miss Lively's hair and makeup trailer while she was topless and having body makeup removed by makeup artists. Miss Lively told Mr. Heath that she was almost done and they could meet once she was clothed. Mr. Heath, however, insisted that if she didn't allow him into the trailer to speak to him at that moment, then there would be no meeting with the other producers. Miss Lively reluctantly agreed, but asked that Mr. Heath keep his back turned. A few times into the conversation, Miss Lively noticed that Mr. Heath was staring directly at her while she was topless. When she called him out, Mr. Heath brushed it off as a habit of wanting to look at a person while speaking to them. Miss Lively and her hair and makeup artist were all deeply disturbed by this interaction on just the second day of filming. Throughout filming, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath evaded Miss Lively's privacy by entering her makeup trailer uninvited while she was undressed, including when she was breastfeeding her infant child. Miss Lively often had to work while breastfeeding, which she felt comfortable doing so long as she was given the time and space to cover herself. She did this frequently because she was not given breaks to feed her baby, but Miss Lively did not expect or consent to anyone entering her private spaces while topless, exposed, and vulnerable with their newborn or during her body makeup application or removal. Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath both showed a shocking lack of boundaries by invading her personal space when she was undressed and vulnerable. Mr. Baldoni also routinely degraded Miss Lively by finding back-channel ways of criticizing her body and weight. A few weeks before filming began and less than 4 months after Miss Lively had given birth to her 4th child, Ms. Lively was humiliated to learn that Mr. Baldoni secretly called her fitness trainer without her knowledge or permission and implied that he wanted her to lose weight in 2 weeks. Mr. Baldoni told the trainer that he had asked because he was concerned about having to pick Miss Lively up in a scene for the movie, but there was no such scene. When Miss Lively caught strep throat, Mr. Baldoni offered her as a gift to connect her with an expert he had on a retainer to help her with probiotics and to combat the sickness. When Miss Lively went to fill out the privacy forms, she saw the expert was not what Mr. Baldoni had represented her to be. She was instead a weight loss specialist. Miss Lively felt once again Mr. Baldoni was shaming her for her body and weight. And as far as filming on set and the sexual harassment allegations, this is where it ends. But now that you've read the filings and you know exactly all the things that Blake Lively is alleging, what do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know below, and then we are going to come back in the next video and hash everything out.